For 32 years, I was a shadow in my own family. Constantly compared, neglected, treated as if I didn't exist. But the final straw was that Christmas. I called to say I'd come home for the holidays, and my parents coldly replied, "Sorry, we're on vacation with your brother. This time is only for special people." Special people? I was their son, yet in their eyes I was anything but special. Well, they would also miss out on the special gift I had for them. And when my parents and brother learned what that gift was, they called and texted so frantically I thought my phone might explode. "Hello? My name is Logan Foster." I sat quietly in my small Chicago apartment, under the warm golden glow of a tiny Christmas tree on the table, casting faint streaks of light on the walls. Outside, snow fell silently, blanketing the street in white. I held my phone, my fingers scrolling across the screen, my heart pounding as I dialed my mother's number. This was the first time in 3 years I'd called before Christmas, not to apologize or explain, but to share good news. I was coming home, ready to join the family for dinner, to decorate the tree, to laugh and talk like other families do. I imagined my parents would cheer, saying how much they'd missed me. But I was wrong. The phone rang a few times before my mother picked up. Her voice came through, slightly tired but as icy as ever. "Logan? What's the matter?" I smiled, trying to keep my tone light and excited. "Mom, I'm calling to let you know I'll be home for Christmas. I've arranged everything at work and will come early to help prepare. It's been so long since I..." She cut me off, her voice flat like she was reading a notice. "Oh, Logan, sorry. We're not home right now. We're on vacation with Josh and his family. This time is just for special people, so please understand." I heard my brother Josh's laughter in the background, mixed with the chatter of children. I froze, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind blank. Special people? I was their eldest son, the one who spent his entire childhood yielding, sacrificing, trying to please them. Yet in their eyes, I wasn't special. I wasn't invited. I didn't belong to the family. "Logan, are you still there?" My mother's voice broke through as if she'd just noticed my silence had lasted too long. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I'm here." "So, where are you all?" "In Florida. We rented a villa by the beach for Christmas with Josh, his wife, and the kids. Everyone's having a great time, you know. It's been so long since we had a gathering like this." Her voice sounded excited, but that excitement wasn't for me. It was for Josh, as always. I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see. "Right, I get it. Have fun, everyone." My voice was dry, and I hung up before she could say anything more. The room suddenly felt stifling, even with the window open and cold air rushing in. I dropped the phone onto the table, its screen flickering as if reminding me of the harsh reality that had just unfolded. I wasn't welcome. I wasn't needed. I wasn't considered part of the family. I looked at the little Christmas tree on the table, its silver ornaments glinting under the light, and felt a sharp pain spread through my chest. They didn't need me. Fine. But they would soon realize what they'd missed. I opened my phone and scrolled through photos I'd taken the previous week. A new, elegant house in suburban Ohio where my parents still lived. The house had a white picket fence, a lush green lawn, and large windows that welcomed sunlight. I had bought it, intending to give it to my parents as a Christmas gift, a place for them to retire, free from worries about rent or piling bills. Next to it was a photo of a car, a sleek black luxury SUV meant for Josh. I knew my brother had always dreamed of a car like that, though he never once thanked me for anything. I composed a group message adding my dad, mom, and Josh. My fingers moved over the keyboard, each word like a knife I carved into my own heart. "Too bad you just missed out on a special gift from me." I attached 2 photos, the house and the car, and hit send. No explanations, no accusations, just that. I set the phone down, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. In that moment, I felt relief but also emptiness. I had done what I thought was right, one last attempt to prove I was worthy of love, of recognition, but deep down I knew they wouldn't understand. They never had. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls from Mom, then Dad, then Josh. Messages poured in. "Logan, call me back now." "Bro, what's with that house?" "Son, we were just joking, you know that." I stared at the screen, the numbers and letters dancing before my eyes. They'd seen the gift. They knew. And now they wanted me. But I didn't want them. I reached over and silenced the phone, the screen going dark. The room returned to stillness with only the sound of cold wind slipping through the window and the soft patter of snow outside. I closed my eyes and childhood memories flooded back, sharp and painful. I remembered summer afternoons when I was 10, sitting in the back of my dad's old pickup truck listening to my parents talk about taking Josh to swimming lessons. I had begged to join, wanting to splash in the cool water too. But Dad glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his voice curt. "Logan, you're old enough to take care of yourself. Josh needs to learn to swim. He's weak and could drown." I nodded, staring out the window at the passing cornfields, telling myself I didn't need to swim, didn't need anything. But my 10-year-old heart tightened. I didn't want to compete with Josh, but I wanted my parents to see me, to include me in their plans. Instead, I was pushed aside like an extra in my own family. When I tried to share my drawings from school or how I'd run the fastest in gym class, my parents would mumble a response before turning to ask Josh about his soccer team or piano lessons. I learned to stay quiet, to hide my joys and sorrows because I knew they'd never be heard. I opened my eyes, looking out the window. The snow still fell, covering the world outside in white. But inside me, a storm was brewing, not of anger, but of awakening. For years, I had tried to be loved, to be recognized. I had done everything, studied hard, worked myself to exhaustion, built a career from nothing, just to hear a word of praise, to feel a hug, to see a sign that I too was special in my family's eyes. The phone lay silent on the table. I knew if I turned the ringer back on, I'd hear my mother's voice, maybe apologizing, maybe making excuses. I'd hear Josh, perhaps angry, perhaps trying to make amends. But I didn't want to hear them. Not tonight. Not now. I turned back to the table, picking up a glass of red wine from the bottle I'd opened earlier. I raised it, looking through the clear glass where the Christmas lights reflected in shimmering glints. "To me," I whispered, "for surviving it all." I took a sip, letting the bitter taste linger on my tongue, and felt a strange peace flood my heart. That Christmas Eve, I didn't answer any calls. I didn't open any messages. I sat there in my small apartment, with my little Christmas tree and my glass of wine, letting childhood memories play like an old movie. Each scene, each moment was painful, but they no longer hurt as they once did. They were just pieces of a story, the story of a boy who once craved love and a man who had now learned to love himself. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, where the roads were covered with golden leaves in autumn and endless cornfields stretched into the distance. My family lived at the end of Maple Street in an old wooden house with faded shingles and a rickety fence. It wasn't a bad place to grow up, but it never truly felt like home to me. We were lower middle class, where every penny was carefully counted. My father, Bruce Foster, worked at a nearby steel factory. He left early and came home late, his face always carrying the scent of sweat and machine oil. My mother, Kathleen, was a cashier at a grocery store, sometimes taking on cleaning jobs to earn a few extra dollars. They worked hard, I knew that. But the love they gave me was always divided unevenly, with the largest share invariably going to my younger brother, Josh. Josh was 3 years younger than me, a frail child from the moment he was born. I still remember the days when my mother sat by his hospital bed, her eyes red and swollen, clutching Josh's hand as if letting go would make him disappear. My parents said Josh needed special care, needed more love because he was weak, because he was sensitive. As for me, the eldest son, I was labeled strong and independent. And so I had to yield. I had to sacrifice. I had to accept. My childhood memories are like a book with missing pages, leaving only fragmented, scratched pieces. I recall winter mornings when Josh and I would run out to play in the snow. Josh was wrapped in a brand new coat and a soft wool scarf while I wore my father's oversized, worn-out jacket, riddled with holes my mother hadn't had time to mend. "Logan, you're old enough to handle the cold," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm. I nodded, never arguing, but inside a quiet pain simmered. Christmas etched that favoritism into my memory most vividly. I remember when I was 7, the family gathered around the Christmas tree in the living room. The lights twinkled and the smell of my mother's freshly baked gingerbread cookies filled the house. Josh sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by boxes wrapped in red, green, and gold paper. He tore them open, squealing with delight at a remote-controlled toy car, a brand new Lego set, and a pair of basketball shoes he'd wanted all year. I sat tucked in a corner, clutching my single gift, a used science book with a worn cover and a short note from my mother. "Study hard, Logan." I smiled, said thank you, but inside there was an emptiness I couldn't fill. I wasn't jealous of Josh, not exactly. I just wanted my parents to look at me just once, with the same pride they showed my brother. Thanksgiving, birthdays, or any special occasion followed the same pattern. Josh was always the center of attention, while I was the shadow on the sidelines. At Josh's 10th birthday party, my mother made a 3-tier chocolate cake, my favorite kind. For a moment I thought just this once she'd done something for me, but when I asked if there was any cake for me, she laughed and patted my shoulder. "You're grown up, Logan. Josh loves this cake, so I made it for him. You can have a cookie, okay?" I nodded, swallowing my tears, and took a dry cookie from the box on the table. I didn't blame my mother or Josh. I came to understand the reason for this favoritism as I grew older. Josh was born frail, spending months in the hospital as a baby. My parents lived in constant fear of losing their youngest son, so they poured all their love and attention into making up for it. I, on the other hand, was healthy, tall, and deemed capable of managing on my own. But managing on my own didn't mean I didn't need love. It didn't mean I didn't crave a hug from my father, a word of praise from my mother, or a gift that wasn't someone else's hand-me-down. In those years, I found a sliver of warmth only with my grandparents, Clifford and Ann Foster. Every summer, I was sent to their small farm a few hours away by bus. Their home was a little haven with fields of vibrant sunflowers and a garden full of vegetables. There, I wasn't the eldest son who had to be independent. I was just Logan, the boy my grandfather taught to fish, the boy my grandmother baked apple pies for while telling stories of her youthful adventures. My grandfather would pat my shoulder and say, "You're a special kid, Logan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I believed him, and those words were the only light in my darkest days. But when I was 9, my grandfather died suddenly of a heart attack. I still remember that day, standing by his coffin, holding my grandmother's hand, trying not to cry. She hugged me and whispered, "Your grandfather was always proud of you." 4 years later, my grandmother passed away too, leaving me with a void nothing could fill. From then on, I was truly alone. There was no one left to share with, no one to tell me I was good enough, worthy enough. Those childhood wounds never fully healed. They smoldered like a small fire burning endlessly in my heart. Every time my parents scolded me for not being as good as Josh, every time I had to give up toys, clothes, or opportunities, I told myself, "It's okay, I'll try harder." But deep down, I knew I was screaming in silence, begging for a bit of love, a bit of recognition. I learned to hide my pain, to smile when my mother said, "Logan, you have to sacrifice for your brother." To nod when my father said, "Josh needs this opportunity more than you." But each time, a small piece of me shattered. As I entered my school years, I began to realize that the world outside was no different from the house at the end of Maple Street. It was cold, harsh, and no one was ready to extend a helping hand to a boy like me. School, with its long hallways and classrooms filled with the smell of chalk, was supposed to be a place where I could prove myself. But even there, I remained a shadow, quietly moving through the laughter of friends and the praise showered on other students. I was 13 when I started high school, a lanky teenager with messy hair and eyes that always looked down. I didn't have new clothes like Josh, no shiny backpack or trendy sneakers. Every school year, my mother took Josh shopping for new supplies while I was handed my father's old bag, a few worn-out notebooks, and the familiar refrain, "Logan, you can manage on your own, right?" I nodded as always, telling myself I would make it work. I started working odd jobs at 14, the kind of tasks a kid could handle. I delivered newspapers every morning before sunrise, pedaling through the foggy streets of our Ohio town. The smell of ink and newsprint clung to my hands, and sometimes when the cold turned my breath into mist, I wondered if I was living the life meant for me. The money I earned went to buying used textbooks from secondhand stores or paying for school lunches. My parents never asked where I got the money. They were too busy with Josh, taking him to extra math classes, signing him up for basketball camp, buying him a piano to nurture his talent. Me? I managed on my own. Once I tried to tell my mother about a drawing class at school. I'd seen a flyer on the bulletin board, a free course for gifted students requiring only that you bring your own supplies. I loved drawing, sketching cornfields, country roads, or my grandfather's face from memory. I thought if my mother knew, she'd be proud, maybe encourage me. But when I brought the flyer home, she glanced at it and sighed. "Logan, you know we're not well off. I need the money for Josh's tuition. Those pencils, paper, and paints, can you figure it out yourself?" I nodded, smiled, and tucked the flyer into a drawer. I never brought it up again. I didn't join the drawing class because I couldn't afford yet another expense when I was already paying for everything else in my life. Those years taught me how to live alone, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. At school, I didn't have many friends. It wasn't that I was unfriendly. I simply didn't have time to make friends. While other kids hung out after school playing ball or getting ice cream, I was at the grocery store stocking shelves or mopping floors for a few extra bucks. When they bragged about weekend trips, I was in my room, hunched over tattered textbooks, doing homework. But that loneliness forged me. I learned resilience, learned not to rely on anyone. I told myself that if my family didn't need me, I would need myself. I worked harder at school not for my parents' praise, but to prove to myself that I could do it. I spent hours in the library reading books on science and technology, things I hoped would one day take me out of this small town. I just needed a chance I had to create for myself. One evening when I was 16, I came home after a shift at an auto repair shop. My hands were covered in grease, my shirt soaked with sweat, but in my pocket was $15, enough to buy an old programming book I'd had my eye on. I walked into the house hoping to eat dinner with my family, hoping for a simple question like, "How was your day, Logan?" But when I opened the door, I saw my parents and Josh sitting around the dining table laughing happily. On the table was a freshly ordered pizza, the smell of cheese filling the air. Josh was talking about a basketball game he'd just won, and my parents looked at him with pride. I stood in the doorway waiting, hoping someone would look up, invite me to join. No one did. My mother glanced at me and said, "Logan, you're back? There's some food in the fridge." I nodded, went to the kitchen, grabbed a peanut butter sandwich, and headed to my room. I didn't cry or get angry. I just felt a familiar emptiness, as if I didn't truly exist in this house. That night, I sat on my bed and opened the old programming book. The dry text and cryptic code became my companions. I read, I learned, I wrote my first lines of code on an old computer I'd bought with my earnings. In the world of numbers and symbols, I found solace. There, no one compared me to Josh. There, I could be myself. Those lonely years of study taught me that I couldn't wait for help from my family or anyone else. I learned to pick myself up after every fall, to turn pain into motivation. Every night, sitting in my small room under the dim light of a desk lamp, I told myself, I can do this. I'll prove I'm good enough. And even though no one believed in me, I began to believe in myself. When I turned 18, I carried a simple but burning dream: to leave the small Ohio town, to step out from Josh's shadow, to escape the house where I always felt like an outsider. College was my chance to start over, to prove I was more than Josh's older brother or the eldest son who had to be independent. But that dream wasn't easy. It came with sleepless nights, exhausting work shifts, and a loneliness deeper than ever before. I was accepted into a public university in Columbus. Not a prestigious school, but good enough for me to hope for a different future. The scholarship I earned covered only part of the tuition, and I had to handle the rest myself. My parents didn't have the money, or rather, they chose not to spend it on me. "Logan, you're the eldest. You need to be independent," my father said, his voice firm as if reciting a mantra. Meanwhile, Josh received full support when he started college. Tuition, dorm fees, even our father's old car to get around. All I got was a pat on the shoulder and a good luck from my mother. I didn't resent them. I was used to it by now. To cover tuition and living expenses, I worked every job I could. By day, I waited tables at a cafe near campus, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to my clothes all day. At night, I took late shifts at a computer repair shop, sitting in a cramped room filled with the smell of burnt plastic, fixing old laptops for a few extra bucks. Some days I slept only 3 hours, my eyes stinging as I sat in class, but I didn't dare give up. I couldn't let myself fail. I wanted to prove I could do it, that I didn't need anyone to succeed. Those college years were a relentless series of challenges. I lived in a tiny rented room with stained walls and a musty smell that clung to everything. Rent, books, and food were a constant puzzle. Some weeks I survived on instant noodles and bread, ignoring hunger pangs to save money for a new programming book. But I never complained. I'd learned long ago that complaining changed nothing. Instead, I poured my energy into studying and working, turning every waking hour into a step toward my dream. Meanwhile, Josh lived a different life. I heard from my mother over the phone that he was joining the basketball club at his school, hanging out with friends, and had just received extra money from our parents to buy a new phone. "Josh needs it to stay in touch with friends and study groups," she explained, her voice brimming with pride. I mumbled a response, not asking why I'd never been sent money or asked if I needed anything. I didn't want to hear the familiar answer, "Logan, you can manage on your own." One winter break, I came home hoping to sit with my parents to share what I was doing at school. I'd earned the highest grade in my programming class, and my professor said I had potential to work in tech. I thought this time they'd listen, maybe even be proud. But when I walked into the house, I saw Josh showing off a new jacket our parents had bought him. They were smiling, asking him about his friends and plans. When I tried to chime in to talk about my class, my mother nodded and said, "That's great, Logan. But make sure to help Josh with his math homework, okay? He's struggling." I smiled, nodded, but inside a storm raged. Those words, those moments of being overlooked, fueled me with an almost obsessive determination. I taught myself programming through free online videos, borrowed books from the library, and spent hours in the campus computer lab writing code. I had no one to share with, no one to ask for advice. Every line of code I wrote, every bug I fixed was a small step forward, a quiet affirmation that I was good enough, worthy enough. But I wasn't always strong. Some nights, sitting alone in my cold rented room with streetlights filtering through the window, I felt loneliness choke me. I wondered if all this effort was worth it. Would there ever be a day when my parents looked at me and said, "Logan, we're proud of you"? I remember one night after finishing a major programming project, I called home, hoping to share my joy. I told my mother about the project, how my professor had praised me in front of the class. She listened, then said, "That's great, Logan. But can you help Josh find resources for his essay? He's really stressed." I hung up, sat in the dark, and felt my heart tighten. But those moments shaped me. I learned to turn pain into strength, loneliness into motivation. I began to dream bigger, not just graduating college, but creating something of my own, something that would make the world see me, even if my family didn't. I started tinkering with a mobile app, a simple idea for tracking health, but one I believed could change how people cared for themselves. Sleepless nights, exhausting workdays, it was all for that dream. When I graduated college, my family didn't attend the ceremony. My parents said they were busy taking Josh to a basketball tournament in another city. I stood among the crowd of students, watching families hug, laugh, and take photos, feeling a cold emptiness inside. But as I held my diploma, I told myself, I did it. Without anyone, I still did it. And in that moment, I knew my journey, however difficult, was only just beginning. After graduation day, I left Ohio with an old suitcase, a laptop with worn-out keys, and a shaky dream: to become a programmer and create something meaningful. Chicago welcomed me with bustling streets, cold skyscrapers, and a harsher reality than I had imagined. I had no connections, no mentors, just myself and a fragile belief that I could achieve something great. But that belief, no matter how intense, wasn't enough to pay the rent or fill my hungry stomach every night. The first months in Chicago were an endless string of long days. I applied for jobs everywhere, from small startups to large tech companies, but the answer was always the same: you need experience. Experience? I had experience. The nights spent self-teaching programming in a damp rental room, the lines of code I wrote until my eyes burned, the times I debugged until dawn. But those things weren't on paper, and in the eyes of the recruiters, I was just a young guy from a small town, nothing special. To survive, I took on every odd job imaginable. I waited tables at a crowded bar where the smell of beer and the shouting gave me headaches. I repaired computers for stingy clients, sometimes getting paid just a few bucks after hours of work. There were nights when I sat in my tiny apartment, streetlight filtering through the window, staring at the meager balance in my bank account, and wondering if I was on the wrong path. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered the boy Logan who used to pedal his bike delivering newspapers in the cold fog, who learned programming on an old computer, who graduated from college without anyone there to see it. That boy didn't give up, and neither would I. Amid those struggling days, I started working on StepUp, a mobile app for health, an idea that came to me during the runs I took around the park to forget my hunger and exhaustion. StepUp tracks steps, sleep, and health habits, something simple but which I believed could help people live better. I spent hours after my shifts, sitting in the corner of a coffee shop with my old laptop, writing code, testing, and fixing bugs. There were nights when I fell asleep on the keyboard, the screen's glow blurring my vision. But every time I saw the app taking shape, I felt a small spark of hope, like a tiny flame burning in the darkness. I once thought about sharing StepUp with my family, hoping they would support me and see that I was trying. One time, during a rare call home, I told my dad about the app, about how I believed it could change everything. He listened, then chuckled dismissively. "Logan, you've always been a dreamer with your head in the clouds. What makes you think one app is going to change your life? Get a stable job like Josh did." His words were like a knife, cutting deep into my belief. StepUp was initially a failure. I released the first version on the App Store, but only a few people downloaded it, mostly friends from the bar or clients whose computers I'd fixed. Once the app glitched, and I received a barrage of negative reviews. Slow, useless, battery drain. Those words hit me like punches to the chest. I sat in my apartment, staring at the laptop screen, wondering if my dad was right, if I was chasing a dream that would never come true. But then I remembered the nights I'd worked until exhaustion, the times I'd gotten back up after every failure. I couldn't stop now. I continued improving Step Up, adding new features, fixing bugs, and finding ways to promote it. I emailed tech bloggers, posted on forums, even designed simple posters myself to put up in coffee shops. I did it all alone, with no team, no funding, just determination and an old laptop. Step by step, I built Step Up from a vague idea into something real. And then, one day, I received an email from a small tech company asking if I'd like to collaborate on developing the app. That was the first ray of light, a sign that I was on the right track. From there, Step Up started to gain attention. Downloads increased gradually from a few dozen to a few hundred, then a few thousand. Positive reviews began to appear, and I received emails from users saying the app had helped them change their habits and live healthier. Each of those emails was a brick building my confidence. But that joy, I had no one to share it with. I called home again with naive hope that this time my parents would listen. I told them about Step Up getting noticed, about the email from the tech company. Mom listened, then said, "That's great, Logan. But have you heard Josh got promoted? He's just become a manager. The whole family is planning a celebration." I smiled bitterly. "Wonderful, Mom." And then the real turning point came. 3 months before that special Christmas Eve, I received an email from a large tech corporation expressing interest in acquiring Step Up for $5 million. $5 million. A number I never dared imagine during my days delivering newspapers, fixing computers, or eating instant noodles to get by. I negotiated with them carefully but firmly, and in the end, we settled on $5,600,000. On the day I signed the contract, I stood in their luxurious office, looking out at the Chicago skyline, and felt a strange sensation, both pride and emptiness. I had done it, but there was no one to share the moment with. The money sitting in my bank account looked like an unreal string of numbers. I sat in my small apartment, the glow from the laptop screen illuminating my face, staring at that figure as if it might vanish if I blinked. $5,600,000. A number big enough to change a life, enough to turn the boy Logan, who once pedaled through cold fog delivering newspapers, into a man who could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone. But as I looked around my apartment, the rickety chair, the chipped wooden table, the tiny Christmas tree on the desk, I realized that money didn't make me feel different. I was still Logan, still alone, still carrying the scars of my childhood. I didn't tell anyone about the money. No social media posts, no calls to brag to friends, and definitely no sharing with my family. I kept living as I always had, wearing my old button-up shirts, drinking cheap coffee at the familiar corner cafe, walking through Chicago's snow-covered streets. The success of Step Up, the app I had poured sweat and tears into building, wasn't something to boast about. It was proof that I, Logan Foster, had accomplished something no one believed I could. But no matter how proud I felt, there was still an emptiness inside me, a longing that money couldn't fill. I wanted my family to acknowledge me, to see me as someone who mattered in their hearts. In the weeks after selling Step Up, I began planning a special Christmas gift. Not to show off, but to make one final attempt to see if I could get my parents and Josh to truly see me. Not just as the eldest son who had to make it on his own, but as Logan, who had overcome every obstacle to achieve something extraordinary. In secret, I searched for a beautiful house in the suburbs of Ohio, with a white picket fence, a lush green yard, and sunlit windows. A Christmas gift for my parents so they'd never have to worry about rent or bills again. Alongside it, a sleek black SUV for Josh, my younger brother who always dreamed of owning a car but never once thanked me for anything. I prepared everything quietly, imagining my parents walking into their new home, my mom smiling at the sight of the bright kitchen, my dad settling into an armchair, flipping through the newspaper as he always did. I pictured Josh driving the car, his eyes sparkling with joy and for the first time looking at me with respect. I spent hours choosing the house, checking every detail, from the wall paint to the heating system. I imagined my mom hugging me, saying she was proud, admitting she was wrong to always put Josh first. I imagined my dad clapping me on the shoulder like my grandfather used to and saying, "You did good, Logan." But even as I dreamed of those moments, a small voice inside whispered that it might all just be a fantasy. And then, on that Christmas Eve, that voice became reality. When I called home, excited to share that I'd be coming back for dinner to decorate the tree together, my mom said coldly, "Sorry, Logan, we're on vacation with Josh and his family. This is just for special people. Special people." Those words cut into my heart like a knife. I was their eldest son, the one who had sacrificed, stepped aside, and worked himself to exhaustion to prove his worth. But in their eyes, I wasn't special. I wasn't invited. I didn't belong to the family. Those words shattered my dream of a warm family reunion. I sat in my apartment looking at the tiny Christmas tree twinkling with lights and realized that the Christmas gift I had prepared, the house, the car, wouldn't change anything. For years I had tried to earn their love, their recognition. I had studied hard, worked myself to the bone, built Step Up from nothing, all in the hope that one day my parents would look at me the way they looked at Josh. But now, I understood that no matter what I did, even if I laid the whole world at their doorstep, they would still choose Josh, still push me aside. The pain, though familiar, left me breathless. But in the quiet of my apartment, amid the golden glow of the lights and the sound of snow falling outside the window, something inside me shifted. I didn't want to keep chasing their love anymore. I didn't want to live to prove I was good enough. I had accomplished what millions dream of, building an app from scratch, selling it for millions of dollars, and standing tall in a world that was never kind to me. I didn't need them to know I was worthy. I stood up and walked to the window, letting the cold Chicago winter air fill my chest. Snow fell silently, blanketing the city in white. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from expectations, from wounds, from the family that had pushed me away. I remembered my grandfather, who once said, "You're a special boy, Logan. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Those words, though spoken long ago, echoed within me. My grandfather was the only one who ever truly saw me, believed in me, made me feel I was worth something. And now, I realized that I had to become the one who believed in myself. I returned to the desk, grabbed a piece of paper, and started writing. Not about the Christmas gift, but about the things I wanted to do for myself. I wanted to travel, to see places I'd never been, to explore the world beyond the small town in Ohio and the streets of Chicago. I wanted to learn to paint, like the childhood dream I'd tucked away because I couldn't afford it. I wanted to live a life unbound by others' expectations, not living to prove I was good enough. The Christmas gift I had prepared for my family was still there, but it was no longer my focus. It was a final test, a way to close the door on the past so I could move forward without looking back. I looked at the small Christmas tree on the desk, its silver ornaments shimmering under the lights. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was mine. A small corner of my own in a vast world. I smiled, not because of the gift I had prepared for my family, but because I was beginning to feel my own worth. I was no longer the boy Logan, desperate for his family's love. I was a man who had learned to love himself, and that was the greatest gift I could give myself. That Christmas Eve, I didn't wait for a call from my family. I didn't open the flood of messages I knew they'd sent after seeing pictures of the house and car I had prepared. Instead, I decided to do something for myself for the first time in my life. I bought a small Christmas tree just big enough to fit on the coffee table and decorated it with cheap silver ornaments and a few strands of tinsel. It wasn't as dazzling as the trees I'd seen on TV, but it was mine, a small, warm corner amid the icy chill of Chicago. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out simple ingredients: some chicken, potatoes, and an unremarkable bottle of red wine. I'm no great chef, but that night I cooked a Christmas dinner for myself. The smell of roasted potatoes filled the apartment, mingling with the vanilla scent of a candle I lit on the table. I played an old Christmas playlist, the gentle melodies of Silent Night and jingle bells filling the space. I invited 2 co-workers from the old bar, Sarah and Mike, the only people I could call friends in this city. They weren't family, but as we sat around the table laughing and sharing small stories, I felt a warmth I'd never known in Christmases past. Sarah raised her glass, smiling. "Here's to you, Logan, for an amazing year. I heard your app was a huge hit." Mike nodded, chiming in. "Yeah, man, you've got to tell us about it." I laughed, took a sip of wine, and shared a few stories about Step Up. The tough early days, the sleepless nights, and the moment I got the email from the tech corporation. But I didn't mention the money or the Christmas gift I'd prepared for my family. I just wanted to savor this moment, realizing that happiness could come from simple things, from people who actually wanted to listen to me. After Sarah and Mike left, I sat alone, looking at the twinkling little tree. I thought about Christmases from my childhood, when I'd stand in the corner by the living room tree watching Josh open colorful gift boxes while I got an old book or a worn pair of gloves. I thought about the lonely years when I worked myself to exhaustion, hoping one day my family would see me. But now, in this small apartment, with a home-cooked meal and Christmas music softly playing, I realized I didn't need them to feel happy. A few days after Christmas, I got a message from my mom saying the family was back from their Florida vacation. They wanted to meet to come to my apartment. I knew why. The missed calls, the flurry of messages on Christmas Eve. They'd seen the pictures of the house and car, and now they wanted to make amends. I didn't respond right away. I let the messages sit there just as they'd left me on the sidelines of their lives for years. But in the end, I agreed. Not because I wanted their apologies, but because I wanted to face them one last time to close this chapter of my life. They came on a cold afternoon with snow still clinging to the streets. My parents and Josh stepped into my small apartment, their eyes scanning the simple Christmas tree, the chipped wooden table, the worn-out chair. For a few seconds, no one spoke, but I could feel the tension in the air. My mom broke the silence first, her voice trembling as if holding something back. "Logan, are you okay? We just wanted to say that the Christmas thing, we were just joking. You're the most special, you know that." I looked at her, saw her eyes waver, unable to meet mine. My dad stood beside her, nodding in agreement. "That's right, Logan. We didn't mean to upset you. You're our eldest son, we've always been proud of you." Josh, standing behind them, said only a brief sentence. "Hey man, I didn't know you felt that way. I was just talking nonsense." I listened to their words, and a part of me wanted to believe they were truly sorry. But their eyes, their tone, everything betrayed the pretense. They weren't here for me. They were here for the house, the car, the money they thought I had. I knew it because I'd seen that look my whole life. The look of expectation, of calculation, not of love. I took a deep breath, stood tall, and spoke, my voice calm but clear. "I've waited 32 years for your love, and it never came. I've tried, sacrificed, done everything to be seen by you and Josh. But now, I don't need it anymore." I looked straight into their eyes, not angry, not bitter, just honest. The house, the car, they were gifts I wanted to give because I thought they'd make you proud. But I was wrong. I don't need to give anything because I have myself. No one said a word. My mom looked down, my dad fidgeted with his hands, and Josh stood silently, his eyes avoiding mine. I opened the door, polite but firm. "Thank you for coming, but I think we have nothing more to say." They left in silence, leaving the apartment empty, but this time I didn't feel the pain like before. Instead, I felt relief, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. I turned back to the little Christmas tree, its lights still twinkling. I picked up my wine glass, took a sip, and smiled. That Christmas, I found my real family, not in the people who shared my blood, but in my own heart. I had learned to love myself, and that was the greatest gift I could ever receive. After that Christmas Eve, I decided to leave Chicago. Not because I was running away, but because I wanted to start anew in a place untainted by old memories, unbound by meaningless expectations. I chose a small coastal town in Oregon, where waves crashed against rocky shores and the air carried the salty scent of the sea. The house I bought wasn't grand, just a simple wooden cottage with windows facing the ocean. But every morning when I woke to the sound of waves, I felt alive, truly alive for the first time in my life. I began doing things I'd missed out on while struggling to survive. I signed up for a painting class at the local community center, where strangers sat around tables holding brushes and laughing about their clumsy strokes. The first time I picked up a paintbrush, my hands trembled, as if I were reconnecting with the boy Logan who used to sketch cornfields on old notebook paper. My paintings weren't perfect, but each stroke of color was a small piece of me, set free after years of being suppressed. The painting teacher, an older woman with a kind smile, would pat my shoulder and say, "Logan, you've got an artist's soul." Those simple, sincere words made me feel seen, the way my grandfather once did. I also started playing the guitar, another dream I'd shelved because I couldn't afford a guitar or the time to learn. I bought an old one from a second-hand shop, and every evening I sat on the porch practicing simple chords, letting the sound of the waves accompany my clumsy melodies. Some nights I hit wrong notes, the strings buzzing off key, but I just laughed and tried again. I didn't need to be good right away. I just needed to be myself. I opened up to my new community. In this town, people were strangely friendly, as if they didn't know I'd once been a lonely man working himself to exhaustion to prove his worth. I joined a volunteer group that built playgrounds for underprivileged kids. The first time I held a shovel digging dirt amid laughing children, I felt a pure joy I'd never known. A little boy with sandy blonde hair and bright eyes ran up, hugged my leg, and said, "Thanks, mister, this playground's gonna be so fun." I knelt down, ruffled his hair, and thought that maybe this was real family. Strangers who were willing to share joy and gratitude. I also used part of my wealth to help others. I set up a small scholarship fund at the local high school for students who, like me, craved education but lacked the means. I supported a few young startups, people with bold ideas but no funding, just as I had struggled with Step Up. Each time I received a thank you email from a scholarship recipient or a handshake from a startup founder, my heart felt lighter. I didn't do these things for recognition, but because I knew what it was like to fight alone, and I wanted others to have the opportunities I hadn't. My phone still buzzed occasionally with calls from my parents or Josh. They kept sending messages, perhaps because of the house and car I'd prepared, or because they realized I was no longer the Logan they could push aside. But I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I no longer needed those calls to feel complete. I had closed the past not by erasing it, but by accepting it. The scars from my childhood were still there, but they no longer hurt. They were part of me, but not all of me. A year later, at the next Christmas, I decorated my wooden cottage myself. I bought a slightly larger tree, hung colorful ornaments and twinkling lights. I got myself gifts, a book on art, a pair of hiking boots, and a bottle of fine wine. I invited a few new friends from the town, the painting teacher, a guy from the volunteer group, and a neighbor couple, for dinner. We sat around the table eating the roasted chicken I'd carefully prepared, laughing about simple things. The big wave yesterday, my latest painting, plans for another playground. The dinner wasn't fancy, but it was warm, truly warm, from deep within my heart. When everyone left, I stood on the porch, looking out at the dark ocean where moonlight shimmered on the waves. I sipped my wine, letting its rich sweetness linger on my tongue, and smiled. I thought of my grandfather, of the words he'd once said. I thought of my journey, from delivering newspapers in the cold fog, to nights fixing computers until I was exhausted, to the moment I sold Step Up for millions. I thought of the boy Logan, who once craved his family's love, and the man, Logan, who had found love within his own heart. The final message came to me in that moment, clear as the moonlight on the sea. Sometimes blood doesn't make a family. A real family is where there's respect, love, and peace. And I had found that family, not in Ohio, not in those who shared my blood, but here in this seaside cottage, among new friends, and most importantly, within myself.